8 months after he forced her to choose, Damien Veyron saw his ex-wife standing on a city street, and she was still pregnant. He had told himself she ended it. He had told himself the silence was clean. He had told himself a man like him didn't build futures. He protected empires. He was wrong about all of it. If you've ever watched someone destroy the best thing in their life and not realize it until it was almost too late, stay until the end. This story will wreck you and rebuild you in the same breath. Hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Damien Veyron made the worst decision of his life, it was raining. Not the kind of rain that softens things. The kind that hammers. The kind that turns the city into a drum and fills the gutters with dark water and makes the streets smell like something rotting under all the concrete. Damien stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his 42nd floor office and watched the city absorb it, and he felt nothing. He had trained himself to feel nothing. It was one of the few disciplines he'd mastered young and maintained religiously. His phone had been buzzing for 11 minutes. He'd counted. Not because he was avoiding it, Damien Veyron didn't avoid things, but because he was deciding. Every decision he made had weight behind it. Every call he took or didn't take was a move on a board that only he could fully see. That was how he'd built what he'd built. That was how a 23-year-old orphan from the city's industrial South End had become the man that mayors and police commissioners and rival syndicate heads all quietly arranged their lives around. He picked up on the 12th buzz. "Tell me it's done," he said. The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Vell, his head of operations for 15 years, a man who had seen Damien execute deals with ice in his veins and never once flinched. "The Harmon account is clean, transferred, confirmed, buried 3 layers deep. Castellano's people won't find it." "Good. There's something else." Damien said nothing. The rain picked up against the glass. "Serena called the front desk," Marcus said carefully. "She wants to talk to you tonight. She said it's important." The name landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. He felt the ripple and suppressed it immediately. "I'll handle it," Damien said, and ended the call. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey he didn't want and stood there with the glass until the ice melted. Then he set it down untouched and walked to the elevator. Serena was waiting in the residence on the 38th floor. Not the main office penthouse. He kept those spaces separate, always had. The residence was where he slept, where he kept the small collection of books he'd actually read, where the kitchen smelled like coffee because Serena had made it a habit to brew a pot late on the nights she knew he'd come home wired and restless. He'd never once asked her to do that. She'd simply started doing it. That was the specific kind of damage Serena Vale did to a man. She saw him and responded to what she saw, without being asked, without making a performance of it, and over time it became the thing you couldn't imagine living without. He stepped off the elevator, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. She wasn't crying. He'd half-expected tears, though Serena cried rarely and never without cause. She was sitting straight-backed, with her hands folded on the table and her dark eyes carrying something he couldn't immediately read. She was wearing a gray cardigan, and her hair was loose. She looked like she'd been waiting a long time and had decided to stop being nervous about it. "You should have called me directly," Damien said. He pulled off his jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. He didn't sit. "The front desk is for business." "I know," Serena said. "I called the front desk because I wasn't sure you'd pick up." That landed honestly enough that he didn't argue it. "What's wrong?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Just looked. And Damien had the unsettling sensation of being examined by someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. "I'm pregnant," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. Rain against the windows, the low hum of the refrigerator, his own breathing, which he made himself regulate without showing the effort. "How far?" he said. 8 weeks. He turned and walked to the window. Outside, 40 stories of rain and city light and people who had no idea what was being decided in this room right now. He pressed 2 fingers to the glass and felt it cold against his skin. "That's early," he said. "Yes." "Early enough that—" He stopped. He didn't need to finish the sentence. He was not a man who had the luxury of vague language in his professional life, but in this moment he found himself trying to use it, and he hated himself for it, and he stopped. Serena completed it for him. "Early enough to end it," she said. "If that's what you're asking." He turned back to her. Her expression hadn't changed. She was watching him with those dark eyes that had always seen too much, and he understood in a way he rarely understood things about himself that he was being tested. Not manipulated, not pressured, but simply seen, and the verdict was still being formed. "You know what my life is," Damien said. "I've known what your life is since the second month we were together." "Then you understand." "I understand what you're going to say," Serena said. "I want to hear you say it anyway." He held her gaze. He didn't look away. Damien Veyron did not look away from difficult things. "A child in this world is a target," he said. "Anyone who wants to hurt me goes through the people I care about. You know that. You've seen it. The Melvara situation last year, Gonzalez's family, 3 years before that. Those weren't warnings, Serena. Those were messages written in blood. I will not put a child in the middle of that." "And me?" she said quietly. "Am I in the middle of it?" "You're an adult who made an informed choice." "Right," she said. "And a child can't make that choice, so you'll make it for them before they exist." "Yes," he said, because it was true, and he was not going to dress it up. Serena was quiet for a long time. She looked at her hands on the table. She breathed in slowly and let it out. Then she said, "And if I want to keep it? Then you'll be raising it without me, and without my name, and without the resources and protection that come with my name, because attaching my name to a child is the same as painting a target on them. I won't do it." "You've already decided," she said. "I decided before you finished the sentence." She nodded once, very slowly. It was the kind of nod that wasn't agreement. It was something closer to resignation, meaning recognition, the specific exhaustion of a person confirming something they'd already known in their bones but had held out against anyway. "I understand," she said. Those 2 words. The way she said them, quiet, without heat, without any attempt to wound him with them, were the first thing that got under his defenses. Because a woman who loved him the way Serena loved him, when confronted with the thing she was being confronted with, should have screamed, should have thrown something, should have demanded more from him, fought for it, made him feel the size of what he was doing. She said, "I understand," and that was worse. He called his attorney the next day. The divorce papers were filed within the week. Damien did everything efficiently and without self-examination, because self-examination in his experience produced nothing useful, only paralysis. He structured the settlement so Serena would be financially provided for indefinitely. She refused all of it, which he'd also anticipated. And by the 14th day after her announcement, she was gone from the residence, gone from the building, and answering none of his calls. He told himself this was the correct outcome. He told himself he would return to what he knew. He told himself that in 2 months, in 4 months, in 6, he would stop noticing the coffee that wasn't brewed when he came home. He did not stop noticing. 8 months later, on a Tuesday in late October, Damien was walking back from a meeting in the financial district that he could have sent Marcus to handle and hadn't, for reasons he didn't examine too carefully. The morning had been surgical and cold. 2 hours with Castellano's former legal team, finalizing the last transfer of a portfolio Damien had been absorbing for 3 years. It was done now, a chapter closed. He should have felt the particular clean satisfaction he felt when long operations concluded. He felt nothing in particular. The city was doing what it did on clear October days, loud and indifferent and crowded with people who all had somewhere to be. Damien walked without his usual 2-man shadow because the morning had been legitimate business in a legitimate building, and sometimes he needed to move without the weight of protection around him. Not often, but sometimes. He was thinking about the afternoon, the calls he needed to return. The report on the Weston Street development that Marcus had sent over at 6 in the morning and that he'd read twice without absorbing. Then the crowd shifted the way crowds do, parted slightly for no visible reason, and he saw her. She was standing outside a small bakery 2 storefronts down, the kind of place with handwritten signs in the window and wire chairs on the sidewalk. She was holding a paper bag against her chest with one arm, and her other hand, her right hand, was resting low on her stomach, the specific unconscious gesture that women make when the weight is constant and the protection is instinctive. She was pregnant, not newly pregnant, not subtly pregnant, Visibly, undeniably, months deep pregnant, the kind of full that changes a person's center of gravity and reshapes the way they carry themselves. She was standing slightly sideways, one hand on her belly, and she was laughing at something the woman behind the bakery counter had said through the open door, and her laugh was the same as it had always been, low and real and not performed for anyone. Damien stopped walking. The city kept moving around him. Somebody's shoulder clipped his, and the someone apologized without looking at him and kept going. He stood on the sidewalk with 30 feet between him and the woman he had divorced 8 months ago, and he did the math without wanting to. 8 months. She'd been 8 weeks when she told him. 8 months and 8 weeks is approximately 10 months, and a baby's gestation is approximately 9 months, and he stood there on the sidewalk and he understood, with a precision that was almost physical, what he was looking at. She hadn't ended the pregnancy. She had told him she understood. She had walked out of that kitchen and out of his building and out of his life, and she had kept the child he'd told her he would not acknowledge. The paper bag crinkled slightly as she adjusted her grip, and the sound reached him through all the city noise, and he stood there unable to move for the first time he could remember. Not afraid. He had almost no relationship with fear in the conventional sense. This was something else. A thing without a clean name, some compound of recognition and damage, and the very specific vertigo of a man who has been certain about something, discovering that his certainty was a story he told himself. She turned to go. She hadn't seen him. He was 30 feet away and she was turning to leave, and she had not seen him, and some part of him registered that he could let that happen. He could turn and walk the other direction and carry this knowledge the way he'd learned to carry other heavy things. Compartmentalized, managed, periodically examined in the quiet dark of 3 in the morning, and then put away again. He opened his mouth. He said her name. Serena. She went still. The paper bag stopped moving. Her shoulders pulled back almost imperceptibly. The tension of someone recognizing a voice they hadn't prepared themselves to hear. And then, very slowly, she turned around. The full picture of her hit him in a way he hadn't been ready for, despite already having seen it. She looked different than she had 8 months ago. Older in a way that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with what she'd been through in that time. Her face was leaner. Her eyes were darker, or maybe they'd always been that dark, and he simply hadn't been paying the right kind of attention. She was wearing a loose cream-colored coat, and she stood there looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, which was not a problem he often had with people. "Damien," she said. Her voice was flat. Not cold exactly, emptied of something. He closed the 30 feet between them. He stopped when he was close enough to talk without the city swallowing the words. Up close, he could see what the distance had obscured. She looked tired in a specific way. Not the temporary tired of a bad week, but the structural tired of someone who has been doing something very hard completely alone for a long time. There were faint shadows under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back and a few strands had come loose, and she hadn't bothered fixing them. She held the paper bag like it was the only thing she was carrying on purpose. "You didn't," he started. "No," she said. "I didn't." He looked at her stomach. He couldn't help it. His eyes went there involuntarily, and he made no attempt to pretend otherwise. "How long?" he said. 36 weeks. He did the math again, even though he'd already done it. He needed to do it again for some reason. "That's yours," she said. "Yes, in case that's where you were going." Something in her voice was controlled the way you control a thing that has the potential to get away from you. She wasn't screaming at him. She wasn't crying. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the kitchen 8 months ago, with that specific quality of a woman who has already survived something and knows she'll go on surviving and is not going to beg for anything. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "You told me your answer before I finished asking the question," Serena said. "I assumed it stood." "I thought you—" He stopped. He ran a hand over his jaw. He felt something in his chest that he didn't have clean language for. A pressure that had been building for 8 months and had just been handed a name, and the name was heavier than he'd anticipated. "You were supposed to tell me. I wasn't supposed to do anything," she said. Her voice stayed level, but something sharp entered it, the first real heat he'd heard from her. "You made yourself very clear about what you wanted. I made a different choice. I didn't think you'd be interested." "You kept a child from me." You rejected a child, Serena said quietly. There's a difference. The words were not delivered to wound him. She said them like they were facts, like she was reading coordinates off a map, and somehow that was worse than if she'd screamed them. He stood on the sidewalk in the October air and felt the truth of it go through him with the particular violence of something that cannot be argued. She shifted the bag again. She looked tired, and she looked like she needed to sit down, and she looked like she was not going to show him any of that if she could help it. I have to go, she said. Serena, I have a doctor's appointment at 2. She met his eyes directly. I'm 36 weeks pregnant, and I've been doing this alone for 8 months, and I don't have time to stand on a sidewalk and explain my choices to you. If you have something to say to me, you have my grandmother's address. You've had it this whole time. She turned and walked away from him. He watched her go. He watched the deliberate way she moved, the careful balance, the hand that went back to her stomach the moment she was turned away from him, that unconscious protective instinct that hadn't stopped since the moment she'd made her choice. He stood on the sidewalk alone. Around him, the city moved. Traffic and footsteps, and someone's music leaking from a passing car, and none of it mattered. None of it registered as anything except noise. He stood there, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he did not know what to do with himself. He went back to the office. He sat behind his desk, and Marcus put a revised copy of the Weston Street report in front of him, and he looked at it for 40 minutes without reading a word. Marcus came back at 4, took one look at Damien's face, and didn't ask. Clear the afternoon, Damien said. Already did. Good. He sat in the empty office, and the city got dark around him, and he thought about the kitchen 8 months ago. He thought about the specific sound of Serena's voice saying, I understand, and how he'd taken that sound and used it to close a door and walk away. He thought about 36 weeks of a pregnancy she had carried without his name, without his resources, without, he had to face this, without his presence. And the thing that had seemed like control 8 months ago now looked, from a different angle, like something else entirely. He called his head of intelligence, a woman named Drea, who operated 3 layers beneath Marcus and whose existence was known to fewer than 8 people. Lucinda Marquez, he said when she picked up. Serena Vale's grandmother. I need her current address. You've had it for 4 months, Drea said. I sent it in the June summary. He'd seen it. He remembered now, vaguely, a line item in a report he'd read and filed away without action. He'd told himself it was good to know and had not let himself examine why he wanted to know it. Right, he said. Thank you. He ended the call and sat in the dark for another hour. The thing about Damien Veyron was that he understood systems. He understood how structures were built and how they failed and what made the difference between an organization that survived its crises and one that collapsed under them. He had rebuilt a criminal empire after a near collapse when he was 28 years old, and he had done it by going back to first principles, stripping out everything that wasn't load-bearing and reinforcing what was. He had believed in the clear-eyed logic of a man who had survived on precision and self-control, that Serena was an attachment that complicated his structure, a vulnerability, something that, in the right adversarial hands, could be used to bring everything down. He had acted on that belief with the same efficiency he brought to everything. He sat in the dark office and tried to find the flaw in that logic, and couldn't exactly, and that made it worse, because it meant the logic was sound and he had applied it perfectly, and the outcome was what he was holding right now, which was the image of a woman he'd removed from his life, standing on a sidewalk 9 months pregnant, telling him with those hollowed-out eyes that she'd been doing this alone. He had been right about everything, and it had produced something he couldn't sit with. He tried to sleep that night and failed completely. He lay in the residence that still smelled very faintly 8 months on, like the specific soap Serena used, and he stared at the ceiling and let himself do something he almost never permitted himself. He looked at what he'd been these last 8 months without the filter of justification. He had been efficient. He had been productive. He had closed 3 major acquisitions, neutralized a threat from the Castellano network, expanded into 2 new territories, and slept an average of 5 hours a night while eating meals that he could not remember tasting. He had, in every measurable external sense, continued to function exactly as intended. And the function had felt like nothing. Not bad, not painful, nothing. The specific nothing of a machine running correctly that nobody is using for anything that matters. He told himself this was fine. He told himself this was what he'd chosen and what he was suited for. He told himself that nothing was preferable to the kind of vulnerability that made men like him destroyable. Now he lay in the dark and thought about a baby. Not an abstract concept, not a liability on a risk assessment, but a specific baby. His baby, Serena's baby, 36 weeks old, in a body that had carried it alone through 8 months of whatever those months had required of her. And the nothing cracked open into something that didn't have a clean name and wasn't manageable and wasn't going to be filed away. He got up at 3 in the morning and stood in the kitchen where the coffee maker sat on the counter, unused because nobody brewed it anymore, and he stood there with his hands braced on the counter's edge, and he breathed through what was happening to him. He had been wrong. Not about the logic. The logic was sound. He had been wrong about what the logic was protecting. Bertram. The drive to Lucinda Marquez's address took 40 minutes through the kind of roads that existed at the edge of where the city became something else. Smaller houses, more space between them, trees that hadn't been cut back to make room for concrete. It was Thursday morning. He'd waited 2 days, which was not because he'd been uncertain, but because he'd needed to be sure he wasn't going out there in a state that would make things worse. He was not sure he'd succeeded at that, but he'd tried. The house was older. Yellow-painted wood with a wide porch and a garden that was still producing something green despite October, tended with the specific discipline of a person who grew things because they needed to. There was a rocking chair on the porch and a pair of rubber gardening boots by the front steps and a wind chime that moved in the cold morning air. He parked at the road and walked up the path. The door opened before he reached the porch steps. The woman who appeared in the doorway was in her mid-70s, not particularly large, with silver hair cut short, and the kind of face that registered nothing it didn't mean to. She wore a flannel shirt and canvas trousers, and she looked at Damien Veyron with the complete disinterest of someone who had no investment in what he represented. "I figured it'd be sooner," Lucinda Marquez said, "but you showed up. That's something." She held the door wider. "Come in before you freeze. Coffee's on." He stepped inside. The house was small and warm, and it smelled like bread and something herbal, and underneath both, the faint sweet powder scent of a baby that hadn't arrived yet but was anticipated in the way these things get anticipated. The corner of the living room with the folded blankets, the small chair that had been moved to make space, the quiet expectation built into the arrangement of things. Lucinda poured 2 mugs without asking whether he took anything in his, set them on the kitchen table, and sat down across from him. She wrapped both hands around her mug and regarded him. "She's sleeping," Lucinda said. "She was up most of the night. Back pain." He said nothing. "You know she's 37 weeks now," Lucinda continued. "Due in about 3 weeks. Maybe less. The doctor said the baby's positioned low." "I didn't know," he said. "The specifics." "No," Lucinda agreed. "You wouldn't." She sipped her coffee. "So what do you want?" He had prepared an answer for this. He'd spent the drive rehearsing it, clear, specific, without excessive emotion, because Damien didn't traffic in excessive emotion and wasn't about to start. He was going to say that he understood he had made choices that caused harm, and that he intended to take responsibility, and that he was prepared to provide whatever material support was appropriate while respecting Serena's autonomy. He sat at the table in Lucinda Marquez's kitchen, with the coffee warming his hands and the wind chime moving outside and the blankets folded in the corner, and he said, "I don't know." Lucinda looked at him for a long moment. She had eyes the same dark color as Serena's, and something in the way she used them was similar. That quality of seeing past what you were showing and making note of what was underneath. "That's the first honest thing I've heard from a man like you in 20 years, she said. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the steam rising from it. "I saw her on the street Tuesday," he said. "I did the math." And I've been sitting with it since." He looked up. "I told her to end the pregnancy. I divorced her in the same week. I told myself it was the right call for reasons I still can't find the flaw in. And somehow I'm sitting here because the logic was right, and it produced something I can't—" He stopped. "I don't know how to explain it." "You don't need to explain it to me," Lucinda said. "You need to explain it to her, and she's going to decide whether your explanation matters. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness." "Good," Lucinda said flatly. Because forgiveness isn't mine to give, and she doesn't hand it out for showing up. She hands it out, if she hands it out, for proving something over time. She set down her mug. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. Men who do what you did don't get credit for regretting it, she said. They get the opportunity to be different. It's a small opportunity, and it doesn't come with any guarantees, and most men in your position mistake the showing up for the doing, which are two completely different things. I understand the difference, Damien said. Maybe you do, Lucinda said. We'll see. They sat in the kitchen while the morning got clearer and the house made its small sounds around them. The wind chime, the refrigerator, and then, from the hallway, the slow, careful sound of someone moving toward the kitchen in the deliberate way of a person carrying weight they've learned to navigate. Serena appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing loose pants and a gray shirt, and her hair was loose, and she looked at him with those dark eyes that didn't perform surprise because she'd already seen his car from the bedroom window, and she'd had however long it took to walk down the hall to arrange her face into what it was going to be. I wondered if you'd come, she said. I came, he said. He stood up because it felt wrong to stay seated. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at her grandmother. Could you give us a few minutes? She said. Lucinda got up without a word, refilled her mug, and walked out onto the porch. The door shut quietly behind her. Damien and Serena stood in the small kitchen with 8 months and everything those months contained between them. Sit down, Serena said. You look like you're about to make a formal presentation. He sat. She moved to the counter and stood with her back against it, which he understood was deliberate. She wanted the distance and the ability to see him fully without being at the table with him. I didn't know you'd kept it, he said. I know you didn't. Why didn't you? You answered the question before I asked it, Damien, she said. You told me what a child in your world meant to you. You told me the choice you were going to make. I didn't see the point in updating you on my counterpoint. I had the right to what? Her voice was still controlled, but the edge in it was clearer now, sharper, and he didn't flinch from it. He'd earned it. To what, exactly? You terminated our marriage and told me you'd never acknowledge the child. What right did you have after that? What was I supposed to do? I'll come back every month and let you keep telling me no? Let you watch me carry your child and keep your distance? She shook her head. I protected myself, and I protected her. Her, he said. A beat of silence. Her, Serena confirmed. Her hand went to her stomach. The same unconscious movement he'd seen on the sidewalk. He looked at the floor, then he looked back up at her. I've been sitting with this for 2 days, he said. I know that doesn't mean anything to you relative to 8 months. I'm not offering it as equivalence. I'm trying to tell you that I'm not here because I made a quick decision. I'm here because I've been inside every version of this since Tuesday, and I keep arriving at the same place. Which is? That I was wrong, he said. Not wrong in my logic. The logic was sound, but wrong about what I thought I was protecting. Serena looked at him. She didn't soften. She didn't harden either. She held the look with the patient quality of someone who had decided they were going to hear everything before they decided what to do with it. I built everything I have, Damien said, on the principle that the things I cared about would be used against me. And I spent 9 years making sure there was nothing anyone could use, cutting connections, managing exposure. I thought I was being rational. I thought I was being disciplined. He paused. You were the one thing I let in, and when it got complicated, I applied the same framework I used to manage threats. You treated me like a threat, Serena said. I treated the situation like a threat. He heard how thin the distinction was, which amounts to the same thing. Yes, she said quietly. It does. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind chime moved, Lucinda's footsteps on the porch, unhurried. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, Damien said. I'm not asking for anything, actually. I don't think I'm in a position to ask for things. You're not, Serena agreed. What I'm saying is that I'm here, and I intend to stay close, if you'll permit it. Not to manage the situation or to resume any position I gave up. Just to be here. Serena looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were very dark and very tired, and underneath the tiredness was something he could not read, and he was used to reading people, which told him she was either hiding it carefully or it was something that didn't have a readable surface. 3 weeks? She finally said. What? She's due in 3 weeks, maybe sooner. She looked at him steadily. My grandmother has one rule for men who want to be in this house. You earn your place by being useful, and you don't confuse being present with being forgiven. Those are two different things. I know, he said. Do you? She tilted her head slightly. Because you've spent your whole life in a world where showing up with power is the same as earning something. This isn't that world. My grandmother's world doesn't run on what you control. It runs on what you do when you have nothing to offer. He looked at his hands on the table. Then he looked back at her. I understand that, he said. Serena said nothing for a long moment. Then she pushed off from the counter and moved to the table. And she didn't sit across from him. She sat at the perpendicular chair, which put her close enough that he could see the specific depth of the tiredness in her eyes and the slight tension in the way she held herself against the weight of what she was carrying. Abby, she said quietly. He looked at her. Her name, Serena said. I've been calling her Abby. The name did something to his chest that he was not prepared for. A small thing, 2 syllables, a placeholder that a woman had given to a life she'd decided to protect, alone, in a small house at the edge of the city. While he had been on the 42nd floor running an empire and eating meals he couldn't remember tasting, he sat very still and let it do what it did to him, and didn't try to manage it. Abby, he said. Yeah, Serena said. Outside, Lucinda Marquez's rocking chair started to move, slow and rhythmic, as the morning settled around the old yellow house. Damien sat at the table and understood, with the particular clarity that only comes when everything you used to be certain about has been dismantled and you can finally see the ground beneath it, that the next part of his life was not going to resemble anything he had planned was going to look like. And that was the first honest thought he'd had in 8 months, and he held it the way you hold something fragile, carefully, without gripping. He stayed for dinner. Not because he was invited, exactly. Lucinda came back inside when the morning had fully settled, and she put a pot of something on the stove without announcing what it was or asking whether he was staying, and Serena went to lie down for an hour because her back was bad and she needed horizontal, and Damien sat at the kitchen table and did not leave because leaving felt like the wrong motion, and staying felt like the only thing he knew how to do right now. Lucinda cooked without talking to him for a while. He didn't try to fill the silence. He'd learned early that silence had weight and purpose, and most people ruined it by being afraid of it. You can fix the gate, Lucinda finally said, not turning from the stove. The latch is broken. Tools are in the shed, second shelf. He went and fixed the gate. It took 40 minutes because the latch wasn't just broken. The whole bracket had pulled out of the wood from years of weather, and the post beneath it had started to rot and needed to be shored up before any new hardware would hold. He worked in the cold October air with tools that were old but well-maintained, and he didn't think about anything except what was in front of him, which was unusual for him and felt, against all expectation, like something close to relief. When he came back inside, his hands were dirty, and the latch was solid, and Lucinda looked at his hands, and then at the door, and back at him and said nothing. But she put a bowl in front of him at the table. They ate without much conversation. When Serena came back, she looked at Damien's dirty hands and the new latch visible through the kitchen window, and she didn't say anything either, just sat down and ate, and the 3 of them occupied the small kitchen with all its unresolved weight, and somehow it didn't collapse under it. He left after dark. At the door, Serena stood in the frame with the warm light behind her, and she looked at him the way she'd been looking at him all day. Not softly, not coldly, just honestly, with those eyes that didn't give him anything he hadn't earned. Same time tomorrow? He said. A pause. The porch railing on the east side needs repainting, she said. Grandmother's been putting it off. He drove back to the city in the dark, and for the first time in 8 months, he noticed what he was driving toward instead of just moving through it. And what he was driving toward was the 42nd floor and the untouched whiskey glass and the coffee maker nobody used. And he felt the shape of what he'd built his life inside with a clarity that was not comfortable and not going away. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He didn't stay in the city. He had Marcus run the operations remotely, which Marcus did without comment because Marcus had been doing this for 15 years and understood when Damien had made a decision that was not going to be revisited. He drove out to the yellow house every morning and he worked on whatever needed working on. The railing, a window that had warped and wouldn't seal, a section of the garden fence where the soil had heaved and tilted 3 posts out of alignment, and he ate whatever Lucinda put in front of him, and he kept his distance from Serena in the careful, specific way of a man who has understood that distance, right now, is a form of respect. Serena watched him. She didn't hide that she was watching. She'd sit on the porch with her tea and her hand on her stomach, and she'd watch him work. And occasionally she'd say something. A detail about the fence, a reminder that the shed's second shelf had better hardware than the first, and he'd respond, and the conversation would end there. They were building something in the space between them, but they were building it at the pace she set, and he didn't push. On the 4th day, Marcus called. Damien took the call in the car, parked at the road, before going in. "Melvara's people have been asking about you," Marcus said, "specifically about your current location. They've been asking discreetly, but they've been asking." "What kind of asking?" "The kind that isn't business," Marcus said. Damien was quiet for a moment. Through the windshield, he could see the yellow house and the porch and Lucinda's rocking chair empty in the morning cold. "How specific?" he said. "Specific enough that they know you're out of the city most days. Not specific enough that they know where. Keep it that way." "That's going to require some active management," Marcus said. "Then manage it actively." "Damien," Marcus's voice carried the particular weight of a man who had served 15 years and earned the right to say the next thing. "If Melvara's people are watching your movement patterns and they connect the dots, they won't. You're driving the same car to the same location 6 days running. I know. You're giving them a thread to pull. I know, Marcus." His voice was flat. "Handle the thread. That's what I need from you right now." A pause. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Okay." He ended the call and sat in the car for a moment and looked at the yellow house and felt the thing he'd been trying not to feel since Tuesday, the thing that lived in the gap between the life he'd built and the life that was waiting inside that house, the specific dread of a man who understands that the two things he needs to protect might be incompatible, and that this was not a new problem, but an old one, the same one he'd answered 8 months ago with a divorce attorney and a signed document. He got out of the car and walked up the path. What? The conversation happened on the 6th day, in the kitchen, after Lucinda had gone to bed early with a headache. It happened because Serena asked him a question he didn't know how to answer cleanly, and because Damien, for the first time in longer than he could accurately date, didn't try to answer it with managed language. "Do they know you're here?" she said. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, and she wasn't looking at him as an accusation. She was asking the way she'd always asked things, directly, because she needed the real answer. "Who?" "Anyone." She looked at him. "Your people. The people who aren't your people. Anyone who might care about where Damien Veyron spends his mornings." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "Marcus knows," he said. "My driver knows. That's it." "And the people Marcus is managing," Serena said. He looked at her. "I'm not stupid," she said quietly. "I was your wife for 4 years. I know what managing a location pattern means. I know what it means when you take your own calls in a parked car instead of inside." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "So I'm asking directly, is being here making us less safe or more safe?" The question was clinical in its precision, and it hit him somewhere undefended because it was the exact question he'd been carrying for 3 days without surfacing it. "Honestly," he said, "obviously." "Right now, less safe," he said. "A pattern has been noticed. Marcus is breaking it, but the noticing happened." Serena breathed in slowly. She didn't look away from him. "By Melvara's people." "Yes." "The same people who Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Her jaw tightened slightly. He watched it tighten and watched her breathe through it, and he thought about how many things she'd breathed through alone in the last 8 months, and the thought sat in his chest like gravel. "So your being here," she said carefully, "has potentially drawn attention to a house where a 37-week pregnant woman and a 74-year-old woman are living." "That's an honest summary, yes." "And your solution is?" I'm changing the pattern starting tomorrow. Different car, different routes, different times. Marcus is putting noise in their surveillance, making it look like I'm operating from 3 different locations. It'll muddy the picture fast. How fast? A week, maybe less. She looked at the table, then back at him. And in that week, I'll have 2 of my people on the road outside. Unmarked, distant. You won't see them. I don't want armed men outside my grandmother's house, Serena said. Her voice was level, but the bottom of it was hard. I understand that. Do you? Because this is exactly... She stopped. She pressed her lips together, started again, quieter. This is exactly what you said would happen. You said a child in your world would be a target, and you've been here 6 days and already there are people watching your movements. Yes, he said. So the thing you used to justify leaving, she said, is the thing you brought here when you came back. He sat with that. He didn't argue it because it was true, and he'd known it was true, and it was the thing he'd been sitting with in the car every morning and not finding a resolution to. I know, he said. Then why are you still here? He looked at her directly. Because the alternative is not being here, and I can't make myself choose that again. Something crossed her face. He didn't know what to call it. It wasn't softness, wasn't surrender, wasn't the kind of opening he might have once managed toward. It was more like the face of someone recognizing the shape of a thing they'd been looking at for a long time. That's not a strategy, she said. That's just a feeling. I know the difference, he said. I'm telling you, it's a feeling. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. She picked up her mug and found it cold and set it back down. Different car, different times. Your people stay on the road and they don't come onto this property, and my grandmother doesn't know they exist. Agreed. And if the situation changes, if it gets worse, if the risk goes up, you tell me immediately. You don't manage it quietly, and you don't decide what I need to know to protect my own household. Agreed. I mean it, Damien. Her voice dropped half a register, and the specific weight of it landed. I am done being the person who finds out things after they've already been decided for her. I know, he said. I understand. She held his eyes for another beat. Then she pushed back from the table and stood, slow and careful, and he stood too without thinking. I'm going to bed, she said. The back pain it's been bad today. Is there anything, no. Then a beat later, quieter. Thank you for fixing the fence posts. The one by the garden had been loose since spring. She walked down the hall and he heard the bedroom door close softly. And he stood in the kitchen alone with the cold tea on the table and the wind chime moving outside in the dark. And he thought about what she'd said. I am done being the person who finds out things after they've already been decided for her. And he held it up against 8 months ago and let himself feel the full specific weight of how long that sentence had been true. The week passed. Marcus did what Marcus did, which was quietly and completely dismantle the surveillance thread before it became a rope. The unmarked car at the road changed every 2 days. Damien's patterns fragmented in a way that would read as disorganization to anyone watching, which was the opposite of disorganizing. It required extremely tight coordination, and Marcus executed it without a single visible seam. Damien kept coming to the yellow house. He learned the rhythms of it. Lucinda was up at 5:30 every morning without exception, and the coffee was made by 5:45, and she worked in the garden for exactly 1 hour before the cold drove her back inside. Serena slept later now. The 3rd trimester was making everything slower, heavier, more demanding of rest. And her mornings had a deliberate pace to them, a series of small, careful movements that she'd worked out in response to her body's current requirements. He learned to be useful without being in the way. These were different skills. He drove Serena to her Thursday prenatal appointment because Lucinda's car had an oil light that had been on for a week, and he'd fixed the gate and the fence and the window and the railing, but somehow nobody had mentioned the car. He drove her without making anything of it, just appeared with his keys at the right time, and she got in without making anything of it either, and they drove the 20 minutes to the clinic in a quiet that was beginning, slowly, to feel like something other than distance. The appointment took an hour. He sat in the waiting room among other people who were expecting, people with intertwined hands and shared nervousness, and the specific brightness of people who were in this together. And he sat alone because Serena had not asked him back and he had not presumed. He sat among those people and looked at the wall and felt the shape of his own absence from the last 8 months with an acuity he hadn't been capable of before Tuesday. She came out with a folder of paperwork, and she was moving a little differently, something slight in her step, and he stood up immediately. "Everything okay?" he said. "She's positioned low," Serena said. "Could be any time in the next 2 weeks. They want me on reduced activity." He looked at her. "What does that mean practically?" "It means I need to stop doing things like climbing the porch steps more than twice a day and hauling my grandmother's laundry basket." She looked at the folder in her hands. "It means we're probably closer than I thought." He drove her home, and he was very careful to drive smoothly, which was not a thing he'd ever thought about before, and was now the only thing he thought about for 20 minutes. At the house, Lucinda took the folder and read it at the kitchen table with her glasses on and her mouth making the specific shape of a woman processing information she's been half expecting. 2 weeks, Lucinda said. "Maybe 1. "That's what they said," Serena confirmed. Lucinda looked at Damien over her glasses. "You know anything about what to do when labor starts?" "No," he said honestly. "Good," she said. "Honest answer is better than a confident wrong one. You'll drive. I'll manage everything else. You do what I tell you to do when I tell you." "Yes," he said. That night Damien stayed later than he'd been staying. Not by arrangement, just by the way the evening moved, the three of them at the table after dinner, Lucinda doing something with her hands that involved yarn and needles, Serena reading, and Damien with his phone face down in front of him because Marcus had sent a message that said only, "Melvara's brother is in the city." He read it under the table and felt the specific cold weight of it settle in alongside everything else. Vito Melvara. 41 years old, no official position in the Melvara network, which meant he held every unofficial one. A man who operated at the overlap of legitimate business and its opposite, who had been making particular note of Damien's territory since his brother's network had lost 3 of its 6 revenue streams in the Castellano restructure. Streams that had quietly, through several intermediary channels, ended up feeding back into Damien's operations. Vito Melvara in the city was not a social visit. Damien put the phone back down and looked at Serena reading her book with her hand resting on the curve of her stomach, and he felt something that was not quite fear and was not quite calm, something that lived in the specific register of a man who has been carrying 2 incompatible weights and has just been informed that the distance between them is about to collapse. He drove home after 10. Marcus was waiting in the office when he arrived, which meant it was worse than the text had indicated. "How bad?" Damien said. "Vito has a meeting set up with Renata Cho tomorrow," Marcus said. "Renata Cho's people have been sniffing around the western distribution routes for 4 months. If Vito's bringing her something to work with, then someone told him what to bring," Damien said. "Yes?" "Who's the leak?" Marcus's face did something careful. "We think it's someone inside the Weston Street team. Mid-level. They've had access to the routing information since August." "Find them before the meeting," Damien said. "The meeting's at 9 a.m. "Then find them before 9 a.m. Marcus went to work. Damien sat in his office and looked at the city through 42 floors of glass, and he thought about the yellow house and the woman in it who was 37 weeks pregnant and had 2 people on the road outside that she didn't know were there, and a latch he'd fixed on the 4th day, and a garden fence with 3 new posts. He thought about Vito Melvara and Renata Cho and a leak inside his own organization and the specific way those 3 things pointed at each other, and where the line they formed ended up. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Marcus. "Find the leak. Do not make a move on Vito yet. I need to know what he has before we respond." Then he sat and looked at the city and felt the 2 parts of his life pressing against each other with the particular force of things that have been kept separate for too long, finally finding the same space. And he understood with the cold precision that had built his empire that what was coming was not going to allow him to keep them separate any longer. His phone buzzed. Not Marcus this time. The name on the screen was one he hadn't seen in 4 years. Elena Veyron. His sister, who had left his world by choice when she was 22 and whom he had not spoken to in any meaningful way since the year after she left, who existed, as far as his operation was concerned, entirely outside of it, off the books, out of reach, unknown to anyone who might use her. He stared at the name on the screen and a cold he hadn't felt in years moved through him, because Elena did not call unless something had already gone wrong. He picked up. Elena. Her voice on the other end was controlled, but underneath the control was something tight and high that he recognized as the register of someone holding fear back with both hands. They came to my apartment tonight, she said. 2 men I've never seen. They didn't do anything. They just stood outside my door and made sure I saw them, and then they left. The cold solidified into something that did not have a temperature at all. Are you safe right now? He said. Yes. I'm at my neighbor's. Stay there. Don't go back in until I tell you. Damien, what is happening? I'll explain when I can. Right now I need you to stay where you are and not contact anyone else. Do you understand? A pause. Yes. He ended the call and stood, and for a moment the office and the city through the glass and everything inside both of them disappeared, and there was only the geometry of what had just happened laid out in his mind, with a clarity so absolute it was almost cold comfort. Vito Melvara had not come to the city to negotiate. He had come to demonstrate the shape of what he knew. His sister, his location pattern, whatever the leak inside Weston Street had provided. Vito Melvara had come to the city to show Damien Veyron exactly how many threads he was holding and what he intended to do with them. Damien called Marcus. Elena's been visited, he said. 3 seconds of silence. I'm mobilizing now. Pull from secondary roster only. No one from the Weston Street team. Understood. And Marcus. He stopped. Looked at the city. Thought about a woman in a yellow house 20 minutes away with 2 of his people at the road and a folder of prenatal paperwork on the kitchen table. The location I've been going to. We need to upgrade the coverage. Quietly. Tonight. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, how many? Whatever it takes, Damien said. And Marcus. If anything moves on that location, anything, a car that slows down twice, a face that appears more than once, you call me before you call anyone else. Yes, Marcus said. He hung up and stood in the office, and for the first time since Tuesday, since the sidewalk and the paper bag and the hand on her stomach, he felt the thing he'd told himself he was protecting her from 8 months ago manifesting with perfect, terrible precision, and the specific cruelty of it was that he had told himself he was keeping her safe by leaving. And here was the evidence that he'd spent 8 months being wrong about which direction the danger came from. It didn't come from loving her. It had always been going to come regardless. The only question was whether she'd be facing it with him or alone. And he'd made sure she was alone, and now he was standing in his office at 11:30 at night, looking at his phone and understanding that the choice he'd made in that kitchen 8 months ago had not protected anyone from anything. It had only guaranteed that when this moment arrived, she would be without him. His phone buzzed again. Marcus. Weston Street leak identified. It's Harlan Reeves. He's been talking to Melvara's people since September. He has the yellow house address. Damien read the message twice. Then he was already moving toward the elevator, coat in his hand, keys out. Because Harlan Reeves had been on the Weston Street team since August, and he'd had access to the routing documentation, and somewhere in that documentation, in some margin note or metadata or conversation that Damien's own system had generated, was the address of a house 20 minutes outside the city where a 37-week pregnant woman was sleeping in the back bedroom, and Vito Melvara's people had been building a file for 2 months. And Damien had fixed the gate and the fence and the window and put 2 men on the road and told himself it was enough. He hit the lobby at a run. He drove the way he drove when things had already gone wrong. Not fast, not reckless, but with the specific economy of motion of a man who has removed everything unnecessary from his body and kept only function. 90 miles an hour on the empty highway, one hand on the wheel, phone pressed to his ear with the other. Marcus on the line, running it live. 2 vehicles on the road outside the property, Marcus said. My people confirm nothing's moved in the last hour. Street's clear. Reeves, Damien said. Where is he now? We have him at his apartment. He doesn't know we've identified him. Keep it that way until I say otherwise. What do you want to do with him? Nothing yet. I need to understand the full scope of what he passed before I touch him. He took the exit ramp at speed, felt the car settle back into the road, kept his eyes straight. What's the yellow house address connected to in the Weston Street documents? A pause. He could hear Marcus working. It's in a protection brief, Marcus said slowly. One Reeves drafted in September as part of the Vale Asset Review. You asked for a status summary on... Marcus stopped. Say it. You asked for a status summary on Serena's location 4 months ago. The June summary I mentioned. Reeves was the one who compiled it. Damien said nothing for 2 seconds. The road unrolled in the headlights. So he built the file, Damien said. He built the file, and he's been sitting on her address for 4 months. Marcus's voice was careful now, carrying the weight of a man delivering a verdict he doesn't want to read aloud. Damien. He didn't just hand Melvara a location. He handed him a brief. Names, timeline, the pregnancy, everything in the summary. The car stayed at 90. Vito has a full profile, Damien said. Yes. He ended the call. The thing about Damien Veyron was that he did not panic. He had trained that out of himself at an age when most people were still learning what they were afraid of. Panic was a reaction to information, and information was always manageable if you stayed inside your own processing speed and didn't let the information run faster than you could follow it. He had used this discipline to navigate things that would have destroyed other men, and he used it now, on the dark highway, at 90 miles an hour, to follow the information to its end. Vito had a full profile on Serena. He had her address, her timeline, the pregnancy. He had shown Damien the shape of what he knew tonight by visiting Elena. Not to act on Elena, but to transmit a message. I know where your edges are. I know where you're soft. Which meant Vito had not moved on the yellow house yet. Which meant this was still, by the thinnest possible margin, a situation that could be managed before it became something else. He pulled off the highway at a service road a quarter mile from the house and killed the headlights and called Marcus back. Tell your people on the road to hold position and do not approach the house under any circumstances, he said. I'm going in on foot. If anyone moves on that road in the next 30 minutes, that isn't me. You call me once, and then you act. Understood, Marcus said. He walked the quarter mile through the tree line alongside the road. The October dark was complete out here. No city lights, only stars and the cold and the specific quiet of a rural night that was not actually quiet if you listened. Wind in the dry leaves, something moving in the brush to the east, the distant sound of a car on a road somewhere parallel. He walked without a flashlight because he'd mapped the property on his second visit, and he didn't need one. The yellow house was dark except for the kitchen light. He came through the garden gate, his gate, the one with the new latch, and crossed the yard and went up the porch steps and knocked twice, quietly. 30 seconds. Then Lucinda's voice, sharp and close to the door. Who is it? Not a question. Damien, he said. The door opened. Lucinda stood in her robe with her silver hair loose and her eyes carrying the specific alertness of a woman who had woken before he knocked and was waiting. Something's wrong, she said. Yes, he said. I need to talk to you and Serena, now. She's awake. Back pain's been bad tonight. Lucinda stepped back. He came in and she shut the door behind him, and he heard the lock engage. Serena was in the hallway, standing with one hand on the wall and the other on her stomach, and she looked at his face, and whatever she saw there stripped away whatever she'd been about to say. How bad? She said. He told them both. Not everything. Not the operational specifics, not the full internal scope, but the load-bearing facts. A man named Vito Melvara, a leak inside his organization, a file that included this address, the visit to his sister as a demonstration. He told it cleanly and without softening it. When he finished, Lucinda was sitting at the kitchen table and Serena was still standing in the hallway doorway, and the house was very quiet. How long have you known about the leak? Serena said. I identified Reeves an hour ago. That's not what I asked. Her voice was controlled, but there was something moving underneath it. How long have you known that your presence here created a pattern that could be traced? He held her eyes. A week. You told me a week ago, she said. You told me you were handling it. I was handling it. You were handling it. And someone still built a file on me and my grandmother. She didn't raise her voice. That was somehow worse. You told me you would tell me if the situation changed. You said that specifically. I am done being the person who finds out things after they've been decided. The situation changed an hour ago. And you're here an hour later, she said. But a week of risk management isn't the same as telling me the truth about what I was sitting inside. He had nothing to argue against that. He knew it. She knew he knew it. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Something was moving through her that she was managing with visible effort, and he watched her manage it and did not try to take it from her. Okay, she said. Okay, what happens now? You and Lucinda need to leave the house tonight, he said. I have a property 30 miles north that's clean. No documented connection to me, no paper trail. My people will take you there. I'll stay here and manage the Melvara situation from this end. Stay here, Lucinda said. She was looking at him from the table with those dark eyes that missed nothing. In my house. Yes. To do what? To make it appear that the property is occupied normally while you're moved out of it, and to be in position if Vito's people make a move to verify the address. Lucinda looked at him for a long moment. You're using my house as bait. I'm using my presence in your house as bait, he said. The house itself is incidental. It's not incidental to me, Lucinda said flatly. This house has been in my family for 40 years. I know, I'm sorry. The word sat in the kitchen. He didn't use it often, and it landed with the weight of its own rarity. Lucinda looked at Serena. Serena looked at him. How long? Serena said. How long do we need to be at your property? Until I've finished with Melvara. Days. Possibly longer. Your property, she repeated. Your people. Your perimeter. Yes. She looked at her grandmother. Lucinda gave a small, tight nod that wasn't agreement. It was the acknowledgement that they had been outmaneuvered by circumstances and that anger at those circumstances was a luxury they didn't have time for tonight. Give us 20 minutes to pack, Serena said. He waited in the kitchen while they moved through the house, and he sat at the table where he'd eaten dinner 6 nights running and looked at Lucinda's yarn and needles on the counter and Serena's tea mug from earlier, and he sat with the weight of what he'd brought to this house by coming here. The specific irony of a man who had left to protect someone and returned and made her less safe than she'd been during the 8 months she'd been invisible to him. They were ready in 18 minutes. He drove them north himself, with one of Marcus's cars following at distance. Serena sat in the passenger seat and didn't speak for most of the drive, her hand on her stomach and her head turned toward the window. Lucinda sat in the back and also didn't speak, which was the most pointed silence Damien had experienced in a long time. Halfway through the drive, Serena said, Is Elena safe? He glanced at her. Yes. She's with my people. Good, Serena said, and then nothing else. The property north was a converted farmhouse, clean and warm and stocked, with 4 of Marcus's people distributed around the perimeter in the way that looked like nothing to a passing eye and was everything in practice. He walked Lucinda and Serena through it, showed them the rooms, the exits, the panic protocol, the single clean line to Marcus's direct number. He showed them everything because he had promised to tell her when things changed, and he was going to do that completely even if it was 8 hours late. At the door, about to leave, Serena said his name. He turned. She was standing in the hallway of the farmhouse with her hand on the doorframe, and she looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than tonight. The cumulative exhaustion of months of doing this alone now compounded by this, and she looked at him and said, Fix it. Not be careful. Not come back. Fix it. He nodded. He left. He drove back to the yellow house, and he sat in Lucinda's kitchen, and he called Marcus, and they worked through the night. By 3 a.m, they had Harlan Reeves in a room 2 miles from the city center. Not a violent room. Damien had not conducted his operations through gratuitous violence in years. That was the province of men who needed to perform power because they didn't actually have it. This was a clean room with a table and 2 chairs, and Damien across from Reeves at 1 in the morning with the specific atmosphere of a conversation that was going to produce everything eventually, and that Reeves was only now beginning to understand the full shape of. Reeves was 43, mid-level management, competent in a narrow lane, possessed of the particular smallness of a man who had worked adjacent to real power for long enough to resent that he'd never been given any. Damien had recognized the type without particularly noting it. That was a failure on his part. He noted it now. "How long?" Damien said. Reeves looked at his hands on the table. He was trying to calculate. Damien could see the calculation happening, assessing what was known versus what was suspected, trying to find the edge of what he'd have to give up before he could hold the rest. "Reeves." "September," Reeves said. "First week." "What did you give them?" "Location summary, status report. The pregnancy was in there." His voice was flat, like he was reading off a list and not talking about a woman and a child. "Melvara's contact wanted current intelligence on your personal situation, things that weren't in the operational files." "Who made the approach?" "Woman named Soto. I didn't know she was Melvara's until the second meeting." "But you knew by the second meeting." "Yes." "And you continued?" Reeves said nothing. "How much?" Damien said. A pause. 200,000. He let the number sit in the room for a moment. $200,000, Damien said, for the address of a pregnant woman living at her grandmother's house. Reeves looked at the table. "What is Vito's plan?" Damien said. "Not the Renata Cho meeting, the other piece, the one Serena's address is part of." Reeves shook his head slightly. "I don't know all of it." "Tell me the piece you do know." He looked up then, and Damien saw in his eyes the specific expression of a man who understands that what he's about to say is the thing that changes the size of his problem irrevocably. "The woman and the baby," Reeves said. "Vito wanted a confirmed location and timeline, not to move on them, to have them." The word had landed with its full weight. "To use as leverage," Damien said. "Yes." "When?" "I don't know exactly. After the Cho meeting, I think. Once he'd established the business alliance, he was going to—" Reeves stopped, looked at the table again. "He was going to demonstrate to you that he controlled your exposure, that he could reach the things you couldn't protect from the outside." Damien was very still. "He wasn't going to hurt them," Reeves said quickly, as if this helped. "He just needed you to know he could." "You gave a man who wanted to use a pregnant woman as a negotiating chip," Damien said, and his voice was so quiet it was almost nothing. "A confirmed location and a due date." Reeves had nothing to say to that. Damien stood up. He looked at Reeves for a moment with an expression that Reeves would not be able to describe accurately afterward, because it wasn't the expression of an angry man, and it wasn't the expression of a cold man. It was the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere final. He left the room. In the hallway, Marcus fell into step beside him. "Cho meeting is at 9, Marcus said. "It's 3:15 now." "Vito's not going to the meeting," Damien said. Marcus looked at him. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Vito came to this city with a business alliance and a pressure strategy, and both of them depend on him maintaining a position of information advantage." He walked toward the exit. "Take that advantage away, and he has nothing. He's not a fighter. He's an operator. His brother was the muscle. Vito is leverage and arrangement, and that only works when the other party doesn't know the full picture. So we show him the full picture. We show him I already know everything he knows," Damien said. "And then we show him what I know that he doesn't." "What do you know that he doesn't?" Damien pushed through the exterior door into the cold pre-dawn. The city was dark and still, and his breath came out white in the air. "Renata Cho's been talking to me for 6 weeks," he said. "Vito's meeting this morning is with someone who's already on my side of the table." Marcus was quiet for one beat. Then, "You set up the Cho relationship before you knew about Vito." "I set it up 3 months ago when I noticed Melvara's people circling the western routes," Damien said. "I didn't know it was Vito specifically. I didn't know the scope. But I knew someone was building towards something, and Cho was the obvious alliance point, so I got there first." "So Vito's gonna walk into a meeting thinking he's building a coalition, and find out the foundation is already gone," Damien said. Yes, Marcus exhaled. And Reeves? Hold him. He's not going anywhere until I've finished with Vito. He got to the car and stood with his hand on the door. And Marcus, the full brief that Reeves passed to Melvara, every copy, every forward, every recipient. I want documentation of what was shared and who received it, before 9 a.m. I know what it is, Damien said. Do it anyway. He drove. Not back to the farmhouse. Serena and Lucinda needed to sleep, and his arriving at 4 a.m. would not accomplish anything useful. Not to the office. He drove to the river road, the long stretch alongside the water on the city's eastern edge, where he'd driven sometimes in the early years of his operation when he needed to think without walls around the thinking, and he drove and he thought. The Melvara problem was solvable. He could see the architecture of it clearly now. Cho, the information advantage, the morning meeting, the leverage structure collapsing. And in the same way that he could look at a failing organization and see exactly which supports to remove and which to reinforce, he could see the path through this with the precision that had built everything he had. The Melvara problem was solvable. The other thing was not a problem. It didn't have the shape of a problem. It had the shape of a reckoning. He had spent 8 months believing he'd made the rational choice, and the rational choice had produced a woman in a farmhouse 30 miles north, 37 weeks pregnant, who had spent 8 months building a life in the margins of his absence and was now in motion again because of decisions he'd set in motion by coming back. He had come back because he couldn't make himself stay away. He had told himself that was a feeling, and feelings were manageable. He drove along the river in the dark, and he understood that Serena had been right on the porch 8 months ago in a way that he'd been too armored to receive. She hadn't asked him to choose between his world and his child. She had only told him she was pregnant. He had made every other decision himself, at high speed, with the certainty of a man who trusted his own logic over everything, and every decision had cascaded into this. His phone rang at 4:45. Marcus. He picked up. Vito's moved up the Cho meeting, Marcus said. His contact just called Cho's office. He wants to meet at 6, not 9. Why? We think he knows you've identified Reeves. Damien gripped the wheel. How? Someone in the hold room, Marcus said, and his voice was tight. We don't know who yet. Someone made a call. The cascade. Always the cascade. One crack propagating through a structure you thought was solid, finding every other crack you hadn't identified yet. Can Cho stall? She's trying. But Vito's people are pushing, and if she pushes back too hard, he gets suspicious of her specifically. What's Cho's read? She says give her 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, she can't hold it. Tell her to hold it. He swung the car north, away from the river. I'll be there. You can't be at Cho's building in 20 minutes from where you are. Not Cho's building, he said. Tell Cho to move the meeting. Tell her there's a security concern at her office. Tell her anything. Move it to the Delaney Street location. A pause. That's your location. Vito knows it's yours. Yes, Damien said. That's the point. He drove. The Delaney Street property was a legitimate commercial building, 4 floors, that served as the public face of 3 of Damien's cleaner operations. Vito knowing it was Damien's was not a liability. It was the message. You came to my city to outmaneuver me. Meet me in my building. Marcus redirected Cho. Cho redirected Vito's people. Vito's people, after a 10-minute pause that Damien used to park and get into position in the building's 3rd-floor conference room, confirmed. Vito Melvara arrived at 5:58 in the morning with 2 men and the specific composure of someone who believes he is walking into an arranged situation. He walked into the conference room and found Damien Veyron sitting at the table instead of Renata Cho. The composure fractured, only slightly. Vito was trained well enough to keep it from fully breaking, but the fracture was there, visible in the half-second pause before his face rearranged itself. Mr. Veyron, he said. Sit down, Vito, Damien said. Vito's 2 men looked at each other. Damien's 3 men stood along the wall and did nothing, which was the most efficient kind of statement. Vito sat. He was a lean man, 50-something, with his brother's sharp features softened by an extra decade of business rather than violence. He wore a good coat and expensive shoes, and he sat with the posture of a man who had calculated his position in any room before entering it. He was recalculating now. Damien could see the processing happening behind those careful eyes. "Cho's not coming," Damien said. "I assumed," Vito said. "Harlan Reeves is in a room 2 miles from here," Damien said. "Everything he gave you, we have the documentation of. Every forward, every recipient, every communication between your contact and him going back to September." Vito said nothing. "Your brother's network lost 6 revenue streams in the Castellano restructure," Damien said. 2 of those streams were yours personally. You've spent 8 months trying to rebuild through Cho and using me as the pressure point to force a better entry position." He paused. "It's a reasonable strategy for a man who needed leverage he didn't actually have." "I have leverage," Vito said quietly. "You have an address," Damien said, "and a due date, and the file Reeves built." He laid his hands flat on the table. "I have Cho, I have Reeves, I have the documentation of your approach, and I have the patience to make your business activities in this city very specifically difficult for as long as it takes." Something shifted in Vito's face. A recalibration. He looked at Damien with the eyes of a man reassessing the geometry of his situation and not liking what he found. "The woman," Vito said. "That was never—" "Don't," Damien said. His voice dropped into a register that had no heat in it whatsoever, which was the most dangerous register he had. "Do not tell me what it was never meant to be. You built a file on a pregnant woman and handed it to people who know what to do with leverage. Whatever you told yourself about the intent, you know what that file is for." Vito was quiet. "Here is what happens," Damien said. "You take your people and you leave this city. The Cho Alliance doesn't happen. Not with you, not through any of your intermediaries. Your activities in my territory, such as they are, get wound down in 60 days. In exchange, I don't pursue the Reeves documentation through channels that would make your life significantly more complicated than it currently is." Vito looked at him for a long moment. "And the file? Destroyed. Every copy. Marcus." He didn't look away from Vito. "Confirm." From the corner of the room, Marcus's voice. "Confirmed. Documentation pulled and wiped as of 4:12 this morning." Vito sat with it. He was a calculating man, and he was calculating now. The cost of this versus the cost of fighting it. The strength of his position versus what he'd just seen of Damien's. The mathematics of a war he'd come to the city to avoid by winning before it started, and had instead walked into having already lost. 60 days, Vito said finally. 60 days, Damien confirmed. Vito stood. His men moved. At the door he paused without turning. "The woman," he said. "She doesn't know how close it got." "No," Damien said. "She doesn't." "You should tell her." Vito's voice was not quite reflective and not quite a threat. Just a man reading the room he was leaving. Women who don't know what they survived don't understand what they're still standing next to. He left. The door closed. The room was quiet. One of Damien's men exhaled. Marcus moved to the table and set a phone down with the confirmation codes for the file destruction. Damien looked at the codes and then at the door Vito had left through. He thought about what Vito had said. Women who don't know what they survived don't understand what they're still standing next to. He sat with it in the empty conference room in the building that bore his name in 3 of its registered tenant documents, the city beginning to go gray-blue outside the windows with the first light of an October morning. And he understood that Vito was right. And he understood exactly why Vito was right, and he sat there holding the specific weight of that truth as the room got slowly lighter around him. He had fixed the problem. The architecture was clear, the threat dismantled, the leverage structure collapsed. Vito would leave. The file was gone. Serena and Lucinda could return to the yellow house as soon as he'd swept it and confirmed the perimeter was clean. He had fixed it. And somewhere in the fixing of it, he had made another decision without asking her. He had decided what she needed to know and what she didn't, and the particular shape of that decision was so precisely the shape of every wrong decision he'd ever made about her that he felt it land in him with the weight of something that could not be managed away. He picked up his phone and looked at it for a moment. Then he called Marcus and said, "I'm going to the farmhouse." Marcus said, "It's 6:15 in the morning." "I know what time it is," Damien said. He drove north through the new October light, and the road was empty, and the trees on either side of it had the specific golden rust of a season turning. And he drove, and he did not prepare what he was going to say because he understood that prepared language was what he used when he was managing something, and he was done managing this. He pulled up to the farmhouse at 6:51. The perimeter was quiet. One of Marcus's people nodded at him from the tree line. He walked to the front door and knocked. Lucinda opened it in 30 seconds flat, still in her robe, with the look of a woman who hadn't slept. She looked at his face. "It's handled," he said. "You can go home." Lucinda studied him for a moment. "Then why do you look like that?" He didn't answer. "She's awake," Lucinda said, stepping back. "Has been since 4. He walked inside and down the hall and stopped at the bedroom door and knocked twice. Serena's voice, clear and tired. "Come in." He opened the door. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, with her hands in her lap and her hair loose, and the particular stillness of a woman who has been awake in the dark for hours and has arrived somewhere on the other side of the fear into something quieter and harder. She looked at him. "It's over?" she said. "Yes." "Tell me everything," she said. "Not the managed version, everything." He sat in the chair across from her and he told her everything. Not efficiently, not with the controlled delivery of a man presenting an operational summary. He told her about Reeves and the file and what the file contained. He told her about Elena and the visit and what it was meant to communicate. He told her about Vito and Cho and the meeting and what Vito had built and what he'd come to do with it. He told her how close it had gotten. He told her what Vito had said at the door. He told her all of it, and he watched her face move through it. Not the performed reactions of someone being told a story, but the real reactions, the ones that happened faster than she could manage them. The tightening around her eyes when he said the file included the due date, the breath she caught and released when he said destroyed, every copy, the long, still moment when he told her what Vito had said at the door. When he finished, the room was quiet. "You knew a week ago that the pattern had been noticed," she said. "Yes." "And you told me you were handling it." "Yes." "And last night, when you came to the house," she said carefully, "you already knew the full scope." "I knew enough of it," he said. "Not the full scope. The full scope came from Reeves." "But you knew enough to move us," she said. "And you moved us. And you told me it was about the pattern being noticed, which is technically true, but it's not." She stopped. She looked at her hands. "It's not the same as telling me a man had a file on me and my unborn daughter and was planning to use us as leverage." "No," he said. "It's not the same." She looked up at him. "I told you," she said, and her voice was very quiet now, and underneath the quiet was something he could finally read. Not anger exactly, not grief exactly, but the specific sound of a person who has been right about something for a long time and is exhausted by the confirmation of it. "I told you I was done being the person who finds out things after they've already been decided. You agreed. You sat at my grandmother's table and you agreed, and 12 hours later you moved me out of my home at midnight without telling me the real reason." "I told you. You told me the version that would make me move without panicking," she said. "That's not the same thing." He had nothing to argue against that. He'd known it at the time, and he'd done it anyway. And he'd done it because the habit of deciding what people needed to know was so deep in him that even when he was trying to do differently, he'd reached for it without noticing. "I did that," he said. "I know you did." She pressed both hands flat on her thighs. "I know why you did it. I understand the impulse. You needed me to move, and you gave me the information you calculated I'd need to move without the information you calculated would complicate the moving." She looked at him steadily. "That's the same logic you've been running on for 20 years. That's the logic that made you decide in the kitchen 8 months ago what I needed to know and what you'd handle on my behalf." "I know," he said. "You can't do that," she said. "If you're here, if you want to be here, you cannot keep doing that. Not with information about my safety and my daughter's safety and decisions that affect my life." She didn't raise her voice. It stayed level and clear, and the levelness of it was the most devastating thing in the room. "I would rather panic and be scared and make the decision myself with full information than be managed through it by someone who thinks they know better what I can handle." You're right, he said. I know I'm right. Her jaw tightened for a moment. I've been right about this specific thing for 4 years, and being right about it has cost me more than I can tell you, and I don't want to have this conversation again. He sat in the chair and looked at her, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands flat on her thighs and her back straight and her eyes dark with all the tired weight of everything the last 8 months had required of her. And he understood something that he hadn't had the language for on Tuesday or on Thursday or in any of the days since. She wasn't asking him to be different. She wasn't demanding a transformation, a redemption arc, a man who woke up changed. She was telling him, with the specific patience of someone who has used up most of their patience and is spending what's left very deliberately, exactly what the conditions were. Not forgiveness, not a fresh start. The conditions. I won't do it again, he said. You'll try not to, she said. And you'll do it again in some form because it's in you the way certain things are in people, and I'll have to decide each time whether the version of it is something I can live with. She looked at him for a long moment. That's what this actually is. Not a promise and not a guarantee. Just two people deciding, every day, whether what they're doing is worth what it costs. He sat with that. Is it? He said. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, and he let her look without trying to answer the question she was assembling. And outside the window, the October morning was fully light now, and somewhere in the tree line one of Marcus's people was still on perimeter, and the world was doing what it did. Ask me again, Serena said. When Abby is here and we've been through what comes next, and we're both still standing. She put one hand on her stomach. Ask me then. He nodded. She stood up slowly, with the careful leverage of a woman 37 weeks in, and he stood too, and she looked at him with those dark eyes that had always seen him completely. Take me home, she said, and don't drive fast. She's been moving all morning, and I'd like her to stay where she is for at least another 2 weeks. He took her home. He drove at exactly the speed limit the whole way, and he held the wheel with both hands, and he did not try to fill the silence. And Serena sat in the passenger seat with her hand on her stomach and her head turned toward the window, and the October light came through the glass and moved across her face as the road went under them. And Damien drove and breathed and stayed in his lane, and it was the most careful he'd been with anything in as long as he could remember. They were 12 minutes from the yellow house when Serena's breath changed. Not dramatically, just changed. A slight catch, a held moment. A release that was too controlled. He looked at her. Serena. Keep driving, she said. Are you? Keep driving, she said again, and her voice was steady, but her hand had tightened on her stomach, and she was breathing in the deliberate way of someone who has just been told by her body that 2 weeks was a number her daughter had no interest in. He kept driving, and then she said very quietly, Drive faster. He drove faster. Not reckless, he'd promised her that, and he kept it. But fast, with the specific economy of someone who has identified exactly what matters in this moment and stripped everything else away. Both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, peripheral attention on Serena beside him, tracking every breath. She was breathing through it. The deliberate rhythm of a woman who had read everything she could find about this and was now applying it in real time, which was the most Serena thing he'd ever witnessed, and he watched it and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the specific quality of her. How far apart, he said. I don't know yet. Her jaw was tight. First one caught me off guard. I need another to time it. How long ago was the first one? 8 minutes, maybe. She exhaled through her teeth. Possibly 7. He did the math. 7 or 8 minutes apart at 37 weeks was not an emergency, but it was not nothing. He called Marcus one-handed. I need you to call ahead to Mercy General, he said when Marcus picked up. Labor and delivery, Serena Vale. Tell them we're 12 minutes out, possibly less. Silence for 1 beat. Then Marcus, without any of the usual operational cadence, said, On it. Is she okay? She's breathing, Damien said. Make the call. He drove. Serena made a sound beside him, controlled, low, the sound of someone managing something physical with everything they have. And her hand went to the door handle without gripping it, just resting there, needing something to press against. "Talk to me," he said. "I'm fine." "Serena." "I said I'm fine." She exhaled. "Ask me something. Distract me." He thought for 3 seconds. "Lucinda," he said. "She know about the garden in November? Whether she wants the beds turned before the ground freezes?" A surprised sound that was almost a laugh. "That's what you're going with. You said distract you." "She turns them herself," Serena said. "She won't let anyone else do it. She has a whole system." "I noticed. You should have seen her face when you tried to help with the tomatoes. She moved me off that in 40 seconds. 30, Serena said. And then her breath caught again, and the almost laugh went somewhere else, and her knuckles went white against the door handle. He drove faster. They reached Mercy General at 6:54 in the morning, and he pulled to the emergency entrance because it was closer, and a nurse with a wheelchair was already outside, which meant Marcus had done what Marcus did. He got out and came around, and Serena was already opening her door, and he put his hand out and she took it, which she had not done without necessity since the sidewalk. And he helped her into the chair, and the nurse moved them inside, and he walked beside the chair through the automatic doors into the bright antiseptic light of the hospital. In triage, a nurse asked him his relation, and he said, "Father," without any hesitation, and the word sat in the air between him and Serena, and she looked at him but said nothing. They moved her to labor and delivery. He called Lucinda. She had ridden back to the yellow house with one of Marcus's people, and said, "It's time." And Lucinda said, "I know, I've been packed since 4 this morning," and he could hear her already moving. In the labor room, everything was bright and organized, and people knew what they were doing, which was the specific kind of situation Damien could function inside. He stood at the edge of it and let the medical people do their work, and when they moved him back, he moved back, and when they moved him forward, he moved forward, and he took every instruction given to him without argument, which was not how he usually took instructions. The doctor was a small, precise woman named Vance who spoke to Serena directly and efficiently and without softening anything, which Damien respected immediately. She told Serena she was at 5 centimeters and progressing well, and that this was going to move at its own pace regardless of anyone's preferences. "Story of the last 9 months, Serena said through gritted teeth. "You're doing well," Vance said. "Your body knows what it's doing." Lucinda arrived 43 minutes later, still in her coat, with a bag that looked like she'd packed it 2 weeks ago. She came through the door and went straight to Serena and took her hand and said nothing, which was exactly what the room needed, and Serena's shoulders dropped half an inch and she breathed. Damien moved to the far side of the room to give Lucinda the space she'd earned. Over the next 4 hours, several things happened. Serena's labor progressed the way Vance had said it would, at its own pace, which was neither fast nor slow, just steady, with the rhythm of something that had been building for 37 weeks, and was now arriving whether anyone was ready or not. Damien stood where he was told to stand, and he watched Serena move through it, and he did not make the mistake of trying to help in ways that weren't his to help. He made one mistake. At hour 2, when the pain went somewhere new and harder, he moved toward her instinctively, and she looked at him with those dark eyes gone bright with effort and said, "I'm not going to break." And he stopped and said, "I know," and stepped back. Lucinda looked at him over Serena's head with an expression that was not unkind. He got it right after that. He got water when it was needed, and he moved when he was asked to move. And when Lucinda stepped out briefly at hour 3 to speak with the nurse in the hall, he was there, and Serena was between contractions, and she looked at him and said, "You're still here?" "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Her hair was damp, and her face was the most exhausted he'd ever seen it, and she was the most present she'd ever been, fully inside this moment with nothing managed or held back. And she said, "Don't go anywhere." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She nodded. The next contraction started, and she went back into herself, and he stood at the edge of the room and kept his promise. At 10:47 in the morning, Abby Veyron arrived. He heard her before he saw her. The specific sound that a new person makes when they enter the world, the one that is nothing like any other sound. And it went through him the way only a few things in his life had ever gone through him, all the way down to something that didn't have armor over it. Vance said something. A nurse said something back. Lucinda made a sound he'd never heard from her before, soft and cracked open. and Serena's voice, wrecked and clear at the same time. Is she? She's perfect, Vance said. She's right here. They put Abby on Serena's chest, and Serena's arms went around her, and Serena's face did something Damien could not describe, because he did not have the language for it, had never needed the language for it before. The specific face of a woman who has carried something through everything it took to carry it and is now holding it in her arms. He stood at the edge of the room, and his throat did something he had not planned for. Lucinda was beside Serena, one hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, and she looked up across the room at Damien, and her expression was not warm exactly, was not forgiving exactly, was something more precise than either of those. The expression of a woman who has been watching a man closely for 2 weeks, and is now watching how he handles this specific moment and filing the information. He walked to the bedside. Serena looked up at him. She was holding Abby against her chest, and the baby was small and red-faced and absolutely certain of her own presence. And Serena said nothing, just looked at him, and then looked back at Abby, and the permission in that gesture was so quiet he almost missed it. He reached out and touched Abby's hand with 2 fingers. Her fingers, impossibly small, moved. He felt something in his chest that was not manageable at all, and he did not try to manage it. "Hi, Abby," he said, very quietly. The room was warm and bright and smelled like antiseptic and something new underneath it. And outside the windows, the October morning was fully alive, and Damien Veyron stood at the bedside of the woman he had failed in the specific way that only the people closest to us can fail each other, and looked at the daughter he had tried to decide out of existence, and felt the full weight of both those things without flinching from either one. "She has your hands," Lucinda said from across the bed. "The fingers, long." "She has your stubbornness," Serena said, looking at Damien. "She's been doing what she wanted since the 2nd trimester. He looked at Serena. She was exhausted and wrecked and present, and she was looking at him with eyes that had seen him completely since the day they met and had never stopped, even when he'd given her every reason to stop. "Thank you," he said. It was inadequate. He said it anyway. She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me," she said. "Be here." "I'm here," he said. "I know," she said. "Keep being here." They kept Serena at Mercy General for 22 hours, standard after a straightforward delivery. Damien did not leave. He slept for 3 hours in a chair in the corner of the room, which was not sleep so much as the specific suspension of function that happens when a body hits a threshold and does what it needs to do. He woke at 2 in the morning when Abby made a sound, and Serena stirred and the nurse came in, and he was awake and vertical before the nurse had fully entered, which she noted with the particular look of a medical professional who has seen new fathers in all their configurations. She didn't say anything. She did her check, made her notes, and left. Damien sat back in the chair and looked at the room in the low light. Serena was asleep again, Abby in the bassinet beside the bed. Lucinda had gone home at midnight at Serena's insistence. The room was quiet with the specific quiet of a hospital at 2 a.m. The distant sounds of the ward, the mechanical hum of equipment, someone in the hall moving soft-footed. He looked at his daughter. He had not let himself use that word before this. Not internally, not even in the clear privacy of his own processing, because using it had felt like claiming something he hadn't been given the right to claim. He used it now. He sat in the chair in the low light and looked at the small face and said the word inside himself, "daughter," and let it do what it did. It did quite a lot. His phone had 17 messages he hadn't read and 3 calls he hadn't returned. Marcus had handled everything that needed handling tonight, as Marcus always did, and the world had continued to require things from him, and he had been unavailable to provide them for the first time, and he tried to calculate and couldn't, which was itself information. He read Marcus's summary at 2:15. Vito Melvara had left the city at 8 p.m. The Cho alliance was formalized in his absence. Reeves had been handed to appropriate channels with the documentation to support it. Elena was back in her apartment with a 2-person detail that would stay for 30 days. The Weston Street project was back on schedule. Everything was, by every measurable standard, in order. He put the phone face down on the chair arm. Abby made a small sound in the bassinet. Not a cry, just a sound, the involuntary noise of a new person discovering they can make noise. He got up and looked in at her. She was awake, eyes open in the unfocused way of someone who has just arrived somewhere and is still calibrating. She looked at the general direction of his face with those new dark eyes, and he looked back at her. "Hi," he said again, quietly. Same word he'd used before. He didn't have better ones. She made the sound again. He looked at her for a long time and thought about the morning in the kitchen 8 months ago and the specific efficiency with which he'd answered a question that hadn't been fully asked. And he thought about what it had cost and what it had almost cost further, and he made himself look at all of it without flinching or rationalizing. He'd been wrong, not in his logic, but in what he'd used his logic to protect, which was the specific flaw in a way of living built on control and threat assessment. It could protect everything that could be assessed and protect it against precisely nothing that mattered beyond the assessment. He reached into the bassinet and touched her hand again. Same 2 fingers. Her grip this time was different, more deliberate somehow, the way a sleeping person's hand tightens around yours. Her fingers closed around his index finger and he felt it go all the way through him. Behind him, Serena said quietly, "She does that when she's comfortable." He turned. Serena was awake, watching from the bed, and she looked at him with those dark, steady eyes, and the expression on her face was not readable exactly, but it was not closed. "She's been awake for a while?" he said. "Just a few minutes." She pushed herself up slightly against the pillow. "How long have you been standing there?" "Not long." "Damien." "Maybe 20 minutes, he said. Serena looked at him. Then she looked at Abby, and the look she gave her daughter was the private kind, the one that belonged to the 2 of them and was only visible to him because he was here. "You should sleep," she said. "Actual sleep. The chair is terrible." "I know." "There's a family lounge 2 doors down." "I know," he said. "I'm fine here." She was quiet for a moment. Abby's grip on his finger had not loosened. "She's going to need a lot from you," Serena said. "Not protection, not resources. Present, consistent. There when things are boring and when things are hard and all the time in between." "I know." "You've never had to be that for anyone," she said. "Not as an accusation, as a fact." "No," he said. "You're going to get it wrong sometimes," she said. "I know." "When you get it wrong," she said carefully, "you have to say so. Not manage it, not redirect, not handle it quietly and present the resolution. You say what went wrong and why, and what you're going to do differently." "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Abby's fingers were still curled around his. "She chose you," Serena said. "The grip. She does it when she's comfortable." She met his eyes directly. "That means something." He looked at Abby, at her unfocused eyes and her small grip and the entirely unreasonable size of her. "Does it change anything?" he said. "For you." Serena was quiet for a while, long enough that he thought she was going to tell him it was too early to answer or that he should ask her later, or some version of the conditions she'd laid out at the farmhouse. He wouldn't have argued it. Then she said, "It changes what's possible. It doesn't change what's already true." She shifted against the pillow. "What's already true is 8 months of doing this without you. What's already true is a kitchen conversation where you made a decision about my life in under a minute. What's already true is last night, when you told me the managed version instead of the real one." "Yes," he said. "I'm not going to forgive that fast," she said. "That's not how I work and you know it." "I know. But I'm also not going to hold on to it past the point where holding on is just punishment," she said. "That's not how I work either." She looked at Abby. "She's going to need us to figure this out, and I want to figure it out. I want—" She stopped. She breathed for a moment. "I want what was possible between us before everything. I don't know if we can get back to it, but I want to try to build towards something." He stood at the bassinet with his finger in his daughter's grip, and he looked at Serena and he said, "Tell me what you need." "Honesty," she said immediately. "Not the version you calculate I can handle. The real one." "Yes." "Time," she said. "This doesn't happen fast. I don't want you to treat it like a problem with a solution. It's not that." "I understand." And she stopped. She looked at him, and for the first time since Tuesday, since the sidewalk, He saw something in her face that wasn't exhaustion or controlled assessment or the careful guard of a woman who has been hurt in a specific way and learned to watch for its recurrence. There was something under all of that she was letting him see. "Don't disappear again," she said. "Whatever else happens, whatever goes wrong between us, don't decide on my behalf what I need and use it to justify leaving. If you need to go, you tell me. We decide it together." "I won't disappear," he said. She held his eyes. "I believe you mean that right now," she said. "I need you to mean it in 6 months, and in a year, and in the middle of whatever the next hard thing is." "I know," he said. "I'm going to mean it then, too." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." And it was not a resolution, was not a clean ending to anything, was something more like a door left open that had been locked for 8 months, and it was enough. Abby made a small sound, and her grip shifted on his finger without releasing. Ouch. At 4 in the morning, Damien's phone lit up with a number he recognized as Renata Cho's personal cell. He stepped out of the room to take it. "I'm sorry for the hour," Cho said. She sounded awake and wary, which meant whatever she had was worth the hour. "What is it?" "Vito left the city," she said. "But before he left, he made one call. Not to his network, not to anyone I expected." A pause. "He called a man named Fedor Gast." Damien was still. Fedor Gast, 56 years old, operated out of the Northern Port Territories. Not a man Damien had ever had direct conflict with. Their territories didn't overlap. Their operations ran in different lanes. A cautious man, patient, the kind who didn't move quickly and didn't move without complete information. "What do you know about the call, Sun?" Damien said. "Duration only, 4 minutes. Gast's number isn't a number Vito should have. They don't have a business relationship. The connection goes through a third party I've been watching for 6 months for different reasons." "What reasons?" Another pause, longer this time. "Gast has been quietly acquiring influence in 3 territories that border yours," Cho said. "Not aggressively, carefully, the kind of acquisition that takes years and doesn't look like acquisition until it's complete." Her voice was precise, and she knew she was handing him something significant. "I think Vito just told him that you have a child." The hospital hallway was quiet around him. 2 a.m. light in linoleum and the distant sound of the ward. "You think Gast was already watching," Damien said. "I think Gast has been watching you for 2 years, Cho said. "I think Vito just handed him the most useful piece of intelligence he's gotten in that time." He stood in the hallway and felt the geometry of it assemble in his mind with the same cold precision that had gotten him through everything else. Not panic, never panic, just the careful, terrible clarity of a man who can see the full shape of a threat and is already running the math on it. A man who had spent 2 years watching him had just been told he had a daughter. Through the door of the labor room, he could hear nothing. The room was quiet. Serena sleeping, Abby in the bassinet. 22 hours old and already the most significant vulnerability he had ever carried. The thing he'd spent his life refusing to create, now here and real and curled around his finger. He had fixed the Melvara problem. He had not known there was a Gast problem. And the gas problem was not a pressure strategy or a leverage play. 2 years of patient territory acquisition bordering his. The kind of patience that didn't move until it had everything it needed. Vito Melvara had left the city and handed the next man a key. "Cho," he said. His voice was level. "I need everything you have on Gast. Timeline, territories, known associates, the third-party connection. Everything. I'll send it within the hour." "Thank you," he said. And then, because she'd earned it, "This matters." "I know," she said. "That's why I called." He ended the call and stood in the hospital hallway with the phone in his hand and the door to the labor room 5 feet away. And he stood there for a moment doing something he had almost never done in his professional life. He let himself feel the full specific weight of what he was holding before he decided what to do with it. A daughter 22 hours old. A woman who had said, "Don't disappear and tell me the real version and we decide it together." A threat he hadn't known existed until 4 minutes ago, patient and positioned, and now, thanks to Vito Melvara's parting move, armed with the one piece of information that changed everything. He had told Serena he would be honest. He had promised her the real version. He put his hand on the door of the labor room and he stood there and he made himself choose right now between the man he had been and the man he'd told her he was going to be. And it was not the easiest choice he'd ever made, and it was not the hardest. He opened the door. Serena was awake. She looked at him from the bed, at his face, at the phone in his hand, at whatever she could read in the way he was standing. And she said nothing, just looked. And the look was the full question. He came back to the chair beside the bed. He sat down. He looked at her. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She held his eyes. "Tell me," she said. He told her about Gast. He told her everything Cho had said and everything the information implied, and what it meant for the calculation he'd been running since Tuesday, and what it meant for the calculation going forward. He told her without managing it, without the version shaped to produce a specific response, with all the jagged edges intact. She listened without interrupting. Her face moved through it. He watched it move, the tightening, the processing, the specific expression of a woman receiving information that changes the shape of something she thought she'd understood. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. In the bassinet, Abby made a sound, small and certain and completely indifferent to the weight of what was being decided above her. Serena looked at their daughter. Then she looked at Damien. "How bad is it?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. "I need Cho's file. I need to understand the full scope before I can tell you." "But you think it's serious?" "Yes," he said. She breathed in slowly, out. Her hands were flat on the blanket over her knees. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "We deal with it," she said. Her voice was not fearless. He could hear the fear in it, low and real, but it was steady underneath the fear, and that steadiness was not performance. It was the specific quality of a woman who has already survived the thing that was supposed to break her and knows she can survive what comes next. "Together. We deal with it together." He looked at her. She looked back. Abby made another small sound. "You said that like it's decided," he said. "It is decided," Serena said. "You came in here and told me the real thing, and now we deal with the real thing." She met his eyes directly. "That's what together means, Damien. It doesn't mean you handle it and tell me the resolution. It means we're both inside it." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "I'm learning," he said. Something shifted in her face, very small, the specific movement of a wall that hasn't come down but has found a crack in it that wasn't there before. "Get some sleep," she said. "Lounge down the hall. I need you functional, not running on 3 hours in a chair." "I'll sleep when—" "Now," she said. "Abby's not going anywhere. Gast is not moving in the next 4 hours. Go." He looked at her. He looked at Abby. He stood up. At the door, he paused, not because he'd decided anything, just because the room behind him, the warm light, the bassinet, Serena with her hands flat on the blanket, had a specific weight to it that he wanted to hold for one more second before he went back to the work of protecting it. "Serena," he said. "Yeah." "When she's older," he said, "when she can understand things, I want her to know what you did." He looked at the floor for a moment. "What it cost you, what you chose." He looked back. "I don't want it to be a story about me coming back. I want it to be a story about what you carried." The room was very quiet. Serena looked at him for a long moment, and her eyes were bright with something she didn't let fall, and she said, very quietly, "Then help me make it a story worth telling." He nodded. He walked down the hall to the family lounge, and he sat in a chair that was only marginally better than the one in the labor room, and he pulled up the first of Cho's incoming files, and the city outside the hospital windows was beginning its first gray motion toward dawn. And somewhere in a port territory 200 miles north, a man named Fedor Gast was sitting on 2 years of careful work and a piece of information that had arrived 4 hours ago. And Damien Veyron sat in a hospital lounge with his daughter, 22 hours old, down the hall, and looked at everything he had to protect and understood with total clarity that the next move was the most important one he'd ever made. And that unlike every move before it, he was not going to make it. He was going to go back to that room in 4 hours and show Serena the file, and they were going to make it. He opened the file. And 2 pages in, he found something that made his blood go cold in a way that the last 72 hours had not managed to, something that reframed every decision he'd made since Tuesday, something that told him the gas situation was not new and was not Vito's doing and had not started 2 years ago the way Cho had believed. something that told him it had started much closer to home than that, with a name he recognized, in a place he had never thought to look, and the cold of it went all the way through him and kept going. The name in the file was Marcus Vell. Damien sat in the family lounge and read the page twice, then a third time. Not because he didn't understand it, he understood it immediately, with the specific clarity of someone whose pattern recognition has just connected a set of dots that were always there and always visible, and somehow never assembled into this particular shape until right now. Marcus Vell. 15 years. The man who had built the operational infrastructure of everything Damien owned, who knew every thread of every network, who had managed every crisis, including the ones from the last 72 hours, who had been on every call and in every room, and who had, Damien now understood, been the original source of the intelligence that had found its way to Fedor Gas 2 years ago. Not Reeves. Reeves was recent, opportunistic, small. Reeves had handed Vito a file. Marcus had handed Gast a map. The Cho file was meticulous. She'd been watching the third-party connection for 6 months, and she'd traced it back through 4 intermediary layers to a shell company registered in a port city that Marcus had visited 18 months ago for what he'd told Damien was a supply chain meeting related to the Weston Street project. Damien had not verified it because he had never verified Marcus. You don't verify the man who verifies everything else. That was the specific vulnerability you created when you built your trust structure around a single person for 15 years. He sat with the file open on his phone and the pre-dawn gray growing in the lounge windows, and he let himself feel it. Not the anger, which was there, a clean, hard anger without heat in it, but underneath the anger, the thing that the anger was covering, which was the particular weight of a betrayal that has the shape of 15 years in it. Marcus had been there when Damien's predecessor fell, had been there when Damien rebuilt from the rubble, had sat across from him in 100 rooms and 1,000 calls, and had known him in the specific way that only someone who has operated beside you through the worst of it can know you, and had taken that knowing and sold pieces of it to a patient man in a port territory who was waiting for the right moment to move. 2 years ago, before Serena, before the pregnancy, before any of this, which meant Marcus had been building Gast's position before he knew there was a child. The child was not the vulnerability Marcus had created the map for. The child was simply the detail that completed it. The confirmation that Damien had finally, after all these years, made something he couldn't walk away from. He closed the file. He sat in the lounge for 4 minutes, doing nothing except breathing at a controlled rate and following the implications to their ends. Then he called the one person he could call. Renata Cho picked up on the second ring. "How certain are you?" he said. 92%, she said. The remaining 8 is the possibility that Marcus is a passive conduit rather than an active one, but the pattern of what was past and when doesn't support passive. Timeline, he said. First confirmed transfer of intelligence 26 months ago. It's been periodic since then. Structural information, territory boundaries, operational timelines, key personnel, nothing that would have caused immediate damage. The kind of information that builds a picture over time. He's been building Gast's picture of me for over 2 years, Damien said. Yes. He looked at the window, gray turning to pale blue. The city out there doing what cities do at 5 in the morning. The first trucks, the first lights in windows, the slow mechanical reawakening of something that never fully slept. Does Gast move now? He said. With what Vito gave him. Not immediately, Cho said. Gast is patient. He'll want to verify, to assess how you respond to the information, to see whether you're destabilized by it. He moves when he's certain of the outcome. He won't risk 2 years of positioning on an uncertain move. So I have time. Some, she said. Not indefinite. What do you need from me, he said, to complete the documentation on Marcus? A pause. 2 more data points. A conversation I can record, or a financial transaction I can trace to a confirmed Gast account. Give me 24 hours, he said. You have it, she said. He ended the call and sat in the lounge and did something he had rarely done in 15 years of operating at this level. He grieved something quickly and completely, and then he put it away and moved. Not because he wasn't allowed to grieve it, Because the form grief took for a man like him was action, and the action available to him was what came next. And what came next required him to be fully inside the problem without the weight of the grief dragging on his processing speed. Marcus had been his closest operational ally for 15 years. Marcus was also the man who had built a 2-year intelligence transfer operation to a territorial rival. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and neither one canceled the other, and Damien was going to have to hold both of them while he did what needed to be done. He went back to the labor room at 6 a.m. Serena was awake, nursing Abby, and she looked at him when he came in and read whatever was on his face with the precision she'd always had. "You found something," she said. "Yes," he said. He sat in the chair. He told her about Marcus. He told her all of it. The file, the timeline, the 2 years, the specific shape of what Marcus had built for Gast and why. He told her about Cho's documentation and what he needed to complete it. He told her what it meant operationally and what it meant in the other way, the way that didn't have operational language. She listened. Abby nursed. The room was quiet with the particular intimacy of early morning in a place where something new has arrived. When he finished, Serena was quiet for a moment. "He was there the night you found out I was pregnant," she said. Not a question. She was assembling her own picture. "Yes. He called you to tell you I'd called the front desk." "Yes?" She looked at Abby, and he knew from that night that there was going to be a child. "Yes." And he put it in the file. "Cho believes the pregnancy was noted as an intelligence update approximately 6 weeks after you told me," Damien said, "which means he knew you'd kept it before I did." Serena breathed out slowly. Abby had fallen asleep against her, and she adjusted her hold without thinking, the practiced care of someone who has already learned this specific weight. "He didn't tell you," she said. "He had no incentive to," Damien said. "A child I didn't know about was a more useful intelligence asset than one I was aware of and protecting. He let you believe I'd ended the pregnancy." He never said it explicitly. He just didn't correct my assumption. Damien looked at his hands. Which is the specific kind of omission that doesn't look like a lie until you understand why it was useful. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the sky had gone from pale blue to the first real light of the day, the thin gold of a November morning beginning. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Finish the documentation with Cho," he said. "Remove Marcus from his position. Handle the Gast relationship directly." He paused. "None of that is going to be simple or fast, but it's containable." "Containable," she repeated. "Yes." She looked at him. "And us? Are we containable?" He held her eyes. "No," he said. "I don't think so." Something in her face shifted, very small, the same crack he'd seen the night before, slightly wider now. "Good," she said quietly. He left the hospital at 7 a.m. when Lucinda arrived with a bag of food and the specific energy of a woman who had slept exactly enough and was ready to be useful. She looked at Damien on his way out and said, "You look like you haven't slept." 2 hours, he said. "Go sleep," she said. "Come back this afternoon. She'll still be here." He went. He slept 4 hours in the city, in the residence on the 38th floor that still smelled faintly of the soap, and he slept without dreaming, and he woke at 11:15 with the specific clarity of someone who has processed something enormous in their sleep and come out the other side of it. He called Cho first. Then he called a man named Devereaux, who handled the specific kind of internal situation that couldn't go through normal channels, and who had worked for Damien for 8 years without Marcus's knowledge, because some things Damien had learned early to keep partitioned. "I need a conversation facilitated," Damien said. "Tonight. The subject is Marcus Vell." Devereaux said, "I'll have a location by 6. He spent the rest of the day on the work that had accumulated, the calls he hadn't returned, the reports he hadn't read, the operational decisions that had been queued waiting for his attention. He worked through them with the methodical efficiency that had always been his baseline, and it felt different now in a way he couldn't immediately name and then could. It felt like what it was. Work. Not identity, not the substance of his existence. Work that he did well and that mattered, and that was not the thing that mattered most. That distinction had always been available to him. He was only now using it. At 3 in the afternoon, he went back to the hospital. Abby was asleep. Serena was sitting up in the bed eating something Lucinda had brought, and she looked at him when he came in with eyes that were less exhausted than the morning, carrying instead the specific quality of someone who has passed through the hardest hours of something and is now on the other side of them. "How is she?" he said. "Perfect," Serena said. "She had her first feeding without any difficulty, and the nurse says she's latching well, and Lucinda has already decided she has opinions about everything, which, yes, she does." She looked at him. "How are you?" "Functional," he said. "That's not the same as fine." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He sat in the chair. "Marcus is tonight. I have a location and a framework. Cho's documentation is ready." Serena nodded slowly. "Will it be—" She stopped. "Clean," he said. "It'll be clean." She looked at him carefully. "I'm not asking if it'll be clean. I'm asking if you're going to be okay afterward." He sat with that, with the specific quality of being asked that question by this person, in this room, with Abby asleep in the bassinet between them. "I don't know yet," he said. "Okay," she said. "That's the honest answer." "You asked for honest." "I did," she said. "I'm keeping track." He looked at her. She was looking at him with those dark eyes, and there was something in them that had not been there on Tuesday, on the sidewalk, something that had been building through 6 days of gate latches and fence posts and farmhouse kitchens and hospital chairs and early morning phone calls in the hallway, something that was not forgiveness exactly and not love exactly, and was something real that existed between those two things. "Serena," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I need to say it." "Then say it." "I'm sorry," he said, "not for the operational failures, not for the specific decisions you can identify and list. For the thing underneath all of those decisions, which is that I spent 4 years with you, and I never once let you inside the real cost of what I was asking you to live alongside. I kept you protected from the full weight of it, and I called that love, and it wasn't. It was management." She was very still. "What you went through in the last 8 months," he said, "that wasn't only a consequence of the decision I made in the kitchen. It was a consequence of 4 years of me deciding what you could know and what you could handle and what was mine to carry alone. That ends." He held her eyes. "I don't know how to do it differently yet, but I know it ends." She looked at him for a long time. Damien said nothing. "I hope she doesn't grow up knowing what this world costs," Marcus said. "That's the only thing I can say that isn't completely self-serving, so I'll say it and leave it there." He left. Damien stood in the small room alone for a moment. He looked at the folder on the table. He looked at the door Marcus had walked through. He breathed in slowly and let it out and felt the full specific weight of 15 years closing, not cleanly, nothing like this closed cleanly, but completely. He picked up the folder. He called Devereaux and confirmed the transition framework. He called Cho and told her the conversation had produced what she needed and asked her to finalize the documentation for safekeeping. Then he called Serena. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," he said. A pause. "How are you?" "I'll tell you when I see you," he said. "How's Abby?" "She's been awake for an hour demanding attention," Serena said. "Lucinda says she has your personality." "Lucinda's been saying unflattering things about my personality since the second day," he said. "She's usually right," Serena said. And there was something in her voice, low and almost warm, the specific sound of a person who has decided to let something be almost normal, carefully, with full knowledge of how fragile almost normal is when you're building it from scratch. "I'll be there in the morning," he said. "They're releasing you at 10. "I know," she said. "Damien." "Yeah." "Thank you for calling," she said. "For telling me." "You asked me to tell you," he said. "I know," she said. "Thank you anyway." He dealt with Fedor Gas the way he dealt with men who had been patient and careful and had built their position on intelligence that was now compromised. He moved first, moved fast, and moved with the specific advantage of someone who knows the full shape of a threat that the threat does not know has been identified. It took 11 days. Not violent, not dramatic. The kind of resolution that looked from the outside like a series of business decisions, territory agreements, financial arrangements, a restructuring of the port interest that had been Gast's foundation for his expansion strategy. Gast was a calculating man, and calculating men, when presented with the correct calculation, chose differently than fighters would. The correct calculation, in this case, was that Damien knew the full scope of what Marcus had passed him, knew the 2-year timeline, knew every piece of structural intelligence that had been used to build Gast's position, and therefore knew exactly which supports to remove to make that position untenable. He removed them. Gast assessed the result. They reached an agreement. "Serena," he said. Serena came out with a blanket that she put around both of them, her arms going over his shoulders to arrange it, and she stood behind him for a moment with her hands on his shoulders and her chin tilted toward Abby. "She's looking at everything," Serena said. "She's been doing that for 20 minutes, he said. "She's trying to understand it." Serena moved to sit on the porch railing, facing him, facing them both. She had her coat on, and her hair was loose, and she looked the way she had looked on the sidewalk in October. But without the hollowed-out quality, without the carried weight of something she'd been doing alone. She looked like herself, the version of herself that had been there before everything and was here again now, built from different material, but herself. "What do you think she makes of it?" Serena said. "The world?" "I think she's deciding," he said. Serena looked at Abby. Abby improbably seemed to look back. "Tell her it gets better," Serena said. "Tell her the confusing parts don't last forever." "Some of them do," he said. "Damien." "Some of them become easier to carry," he amended. "That's more accurate." Serena looked at him with those dark eyes that had always seen him completely and had never stopped. "More accurate," she said, "and not quite what I was looking for." "You asked me to be honest?" "I did," she said. "I'm keeping track." But the corner of her mouth moved, the specific movement of a woman who has decided to let something be almost funny, and he held it the way you hold a thing that is fragile and real and worth protecting. He looked at his daughter, who was looking at the dark trees with the equanimity of someone who has not yet learned what to be afraid of and is making the most of the ignorance. He thought about the kitchen 8 months ago. He thought about the sidewalk in October. He thought about a farmhouse and a hospital chair and a room he'd cleared himself and 15 years of trust that had cracks in it he hadn't found until the cracks found him. He thought about the specific cost of all of it, and he thought about what the cost had produced, which was this: a porch in December, a daughter against his chest, a woman on the railing with her dark eyes open, and a house behind them full of warmth that he had not built alone. He had not built it alone. That was the thing he had been most wrong about for the longest time. The belief that the only things worth having were the things you built alone, controlled completely, protected by keeping everyone outside the perimeter. He had built a perimeter and called it strength, and it had been the most expensive misunderstanding of his life. Serena reached out and touched Abby's head, lightly, 2 fingers resting on the dark hair, and Abby went very still in the way babies go still when they feel a touch they recognize. "She knows you," he said. "She knows my smell," Serena said, "and my voice, and the specific weight of my hands." She looked at him. "She's going to know yours too." "I know," he said. "You have to keep showing up," she said, "not just for the important moments, for all the unremarkable ones. The Tuesday evenings and the 4 a.m. wake-ups and the ordinary Sundays. Those are the ones that make the knowing real." "I know," he said. "Say it like you mean it," she said. "I'll be here for the ordinary Sundays," he said. He looked at her steadily. "And the Tuesday evenings, and the 4 a.m. wake-ups, and the December porches, and the garden in spring, and the fence posts that heave every winter, and the shed roof that Lucinda is already telling me needs attention on the west side as well." Serena's mouth moved again. More this time. Real now. "She mentioned the west side to you?" she said. "Twice this week," he said. "She mentioned it to me 3 times, Serena said. "I think she's distributing the information strategically. She's very good at that," he said. And they sat on the porch in December, the 3 of them, with the cold and the bare trees and the light from the house coming through the window behind them and landing on the path that he had walked up for the first time in October, not knowing what he was going to find, and finding the thing he had spent 15 years building perimeters against, which was the specific and ordinary and irreplaceable weight of the people you choose and the people who choose you back. And it was not a perfect thing, and it was not a clean thing, and it was not the end of difficulty or cost or the particular hard work of learning to be different than you have been. It was real. It was theirs. Abby made a small sound against his chest, deliberate and certain and entirely her own. And Damien held her and looked at Serena, and Serena looked back at him in the December dark. And that was enough. That was everything.